Sister Miriam had always been the heart and soul of St. Clare's convent, kind, compassionate, and adored by all. Thomas, her devoted servant, had been by her side for years, the quiet figure who ensured her every need was met. But when Sister Miriam was found brutally murdered on the convent grounds, all eyes turned to Thomas. As the investigation unraveled, a chilling truth emerged. The bond between the two was far darker than anyone could have imagined. What started as a relationship of service and trust quickly revealed itself to be a web of obsession, manipulation, and hidden secrets, leading to a crime that would shock the peaceful town to its core. St. Clare's was a quiet town tucked away in the hills, a place where time seemed to stand still. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's name, and life moved at a gentle pace. The people of St. Clare's took pride in their community, and their faith played a central role in their lives. At the heart of the town was the St. Clare's convent, a serene and beautiful place, home to a group of devoted nuns who had dedicated their lives to service and prayer. Among them, Sister Miriam stood out. Sister Miriam was a figure of grace and warmth, the embodiment of kindness in the community. She had been a part of the convent for nearly 2 decades, known for her unwavering faith and tireless work. Her smile was a comforting presence, and her gentle nature made her beloved not only by the other sisters, but by the townspeople as well. Sister Miriam ran the convent with an iron will, but a soft touch, always ensuring that every need was met and that the convent was a sanctuary for those in need. She had a special way of making everyone feel heard and cared for. Many of the townspeople would visit the convent, seeking solace or advice from her. She had a gift for making people feel safe and understood. Despite her deep commitment to the religious life, there were whispers that Sister Miriam was hiding something that no one could quite put their finger on. She seemed to carry a weight, a quiet sadness that would sometimes cloud her otherwise serene demeanor. Some people speculated that her past held secrets, things she had never shared with anyone. Yet in a town that prided itself on its piety, these rumors were quickly dismissed as idle gossip. As the years passed, Sister Miriam's presence became a fixture of the town. The convent remained a place of peace, a symbol of everything good and pure in St. Clare's. But even in the most peaceful of towns, darkness can take root in the most unexpected of places, and it was only a matter of time before the facade of tranquility would be shattered in a way no one could have foreseen. Thomas had been at Sister Miriam's side for as long as anyone could remember. A quiet man in his late 30s, he was known for his unassuming presence and steadfast dedication to the convent. He had never been a man of many words, and his demeanor was always reserved, almost to the point of being invisible. But he was indispensable to the functioning of the convent. He handled the menial tasks, cooking meals, tending to the garden, cleaning the rooms, and did so with a quiet efficiency that was essential to maintaining the daily rhythm of life at St. Clare's. Thomas's devotion to Sister Miriam was unquestionable. He had worked beside her since he was a young man, having been taken in by the convent after he had nowhere else to go. Sister Miriam had been the one to offer him shelter, and over the years he had grown deeply grateful to her for giving him a purpose. The other sisters in the convent respected him, though they often regarded him with a certain distance. He wasn't part of their tight-knit circle. He was a servant, after all, and had always kept to his own space, living in a small, sparse room in the back of the convent, far from the warmth of the communal areas where the nuns gathered. Despite his silence, there was a certain intensity in his devotion to Sister Miriam. He watched over her with a kind of protective care, often appearing at her side when she needed assistance or when she looked tired, offering a gentle word or a hand to steady her. Some of the townspeople found it endearing, while others saw it as strange. How one man could remain so close to a woman whose life was so focused on prayer and service. It was as if Thomas's world revolved entirely around her, a world where he was always in the background, waiting for his every opportunity to be of service. But lately, there had been a shift. Thomas had become more withdrawn, often retreating into his room for hours after the evening prayers. The once reliable servant had begun to act strangely, his movements more erratic, his face often clouded with an unreadable expression. Something had changed in Thomas. Something dark. But no one knew exactly what. The subtle shift in his behavior went unnoticed by many, but for those who were close to him, it was impossible to ignore. The morning that Sister Miriam's body was discovered was like any other at first, quiet and still. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm glow over the convent garden, where flowers bloomed and the air smelled fresh with the scent of spring. The nuns were going about their usual routines, preparing for Mass, when the shrill scream of Sister Anne shattered the peace. She had been walking toward the garden when she saw it, Sister Miriam, lying motionless on the ground, her body sprawled unnaturally amidst the flowers. At first it was impossible to believe. Sister Miriam had always been so full of life, her radiant energy touching everyone around her. She was supposed to be an embodiment of peace, yet there she was, lifeless and abandoned on the convent grounds. The other sisters rushed to her side, but there was nothing they could do. Sister Miriam was gone. The police were quickly called, and the small town of St. Clair's was thrust into chaos. In a town where nothing had ever disrupted the calm, the news of a murder spread like wildfire. Whispers ran through the streets, as the townspeople began to gather outside the convent, desperate to know what had happened. The once peaceful community was now filled with fear and suspicion. Who would want to harm such a beloved woman? Who would have the heart to commit such a brutal act? The investigation began almost immediately. The crime scene was cordoned off, and the police took their time combing through the garden, examining every detail with meticulous care. It quickly became clear that this was no random act of violence. The way Sister Miriam had been positioned, the marks on her neck, and the blood that stained the ground all pointed to something far more sinister than a simple accident or attack. As the investigation moved forward, all eyes turned to Thomas. He had been the last to see Sister Miriam alive, and his whereabouts during the crucial hours were becoming increasingly difficult to verify. He had been found in his room, acting strangely when the others discovered the tragedy. He had no clear explanation for his whereabouts, and his nervousness raised alarms. The police took him in for questioning, but Thomas insisted that he had nothing to do with Sister Miriam's death. His story was muddled, but there was one thing that stood out. He had been near the garden that morning, just a short time before her body had been discovered. His fingerprints were found on a gardening tool, a bloodied spade that had been discarded nearby. The evidence was damning, but was it enough to accuse him of murder? The questions only deepened, and as the investigation continued, the dark truth of what had unfolded behind the convent walls began to surface. As the investigation deepened, the police began to focus their attention more sharply on Thomas. The discovery of his fingerprints on the bloodied spade found near Sister Miriam's body was troubling. At first, it seemed like a simple and damning piece of evidence. Why would Thomas be holding the gardening tool, covered in blood, if he had not been involved in the crime? But the more the investigators looked into Thomas's behavior, the more questions arose. The first thing they uncovered was that Thomas had been acting out of character in the days leading up to the murder. His usual quiet demeanor had shifted, and he had become increasingly withdrawn. Those closest to him noticed that he had been spending more time alone, avoiding the other sisters and even retreating to his room earlier than usual. At first, no one thought much of it. The life at the convent was often quiet and solitary, and the demands of daily routine could sometimes take a toll on the sisters. But now, in the wake of Sister Miriam's death, those changes seemed far more significant. Further investigation revealed that Thomas had been extremely nervous in the hours following the discovery of the body. He hadn't sought out anyone to help him, nor had he expressed any immediate concern when the news broke. Instead, he had retreated to his room and seemed almost paralyzed, as if he were unable to move or react appropriately. It was as though something had broken inside him. This odd response to the death of someone he had been so close to seemed to only reinforce the suspicion that Thomas was involved in her murder. But there was another strange thing about the crime scene that caught the attention of the investigators. Despite the brutality of the murder, nothing in the convent had been stolen. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a robbery gone wrong, and no obvious motive for such an attack. Everything that could have been taken, money, jewelry, even valuable items within the convent, remained untouched. This fact made the crime all the more chilling. If the murder wasn't driven by a need for money or any material gain, what had truly motivated the violence? The police began to explore the possibility of an emotional or psychological motive, and the more they uncovered about Thomas's past, the more questions arose. They learned that he had been deeply attached to Sister Miriam for many years, almost to an unsettling degree. Was it possible that his obsession with her had escalated into something darker? Could he have killed her in a fit of rage when she tried to distance herself from him? Or had there been something even more complicated, simmering beneath the surface of their relationship? The more the investigators learned, the less they were able to rule. The case was spiraling into a tangled web of emotions, secrets, and unanswered questions. As the investigation into Sister Miriam's death continued, the focus shifted toward understanding the relationship between her and Thomas. The more the police dug, the clearer it became that there was more to their bond than anyone had initially realized. On the surface, Thomas had always appeared to be a simple servant, dutiful and respectful of Sister Miriam's position. He was the quiet, dependable figure in the background, never drawing attention to himself. But this outward appearance masked something far deeper, something the town was not ready to confront. The investigators discovered a series of letters hidden in a private compartment of Sister Miriam's desk. These letters, written by Sister Miriam herself, were addressed to Thomas. At first, they seemed innocuous, notes of gratitude, reminders about tasks, and general conversation. But as they read deeper, the tone of the letters began to change. They were filled with emotions that suggested a much closer and more intimate relationship between the two. Some of the letters expressed feelings of deep dependence, and others spoke of long, private conversations they had shared. There were mentions of a bond that went beyond the traditional boundaries of a servant and a nun. In one particularly striking letter, Sister Miriam confessed that she had been struggling with feelings of isolation and guilt. She wrote that Thomas was the only one who truly understood her. She shared personal thoughts about her life before joining the convent and revealed doubts about her faith, doubts that she had never shared with anyone else. This opened up a disturbing possibility. Had Thomas been her confidant, the one person who knew all of her secrets, the one person with whom she had shared more than just the duties of her position? The deeper the investigators delved into these letters, the more complicated the picture became. There was an undeniable emotional attachment between the two. But was it just friendship and trust, or had something more complicated and dangerous taken root over the years? The letters hinted at a growing dependency on Thomas that seemed to border on obsession, with Sister Miriam acknowledging the emotional comfort she found in his presence. But there was a troubling sense of possessiveness in some of her words as well, especially when she hinted at wanting to keep their bond a secret from the other nuns. The investigators began to question whether Thomas had developed a fixation on Sister Miriam, perhaps even an unhealthy obsession. Had his feelings for her crossed a line? Did he kill her in a fit of jealousy, angered by the possibility that she might want to break free from their closeness? Or had there been an even darker, unspoken dynamic that no one had yet uncovered? The more they uncovered about their relationship, the more unsettling the entire situation became. It was clear that there were many layers to this story, and the answers were becoming increasingly difficult to find. As the investigation progressed, the question of motive loomed larger than ever. With the discovery of the letters, it became clear that there was more to Thomas's relationship with Sister Miriam than anyone had anticipated. The emotional connection they shared went far beyond the professional boundaries expected in a convent. But the question now was, what had triggered such a violent outburst? Why would Thomas, a man so dedicated to the convent, murder the very woman who had given him a sense of purpose and belonging? One theory that quickly gained traction was that Thomas had become obsessed with Sister Miriam. The letters spoke of a deep emotional bond, but there were also hints of something darker, something possessive. In some of her writings, Sister Miriam expressed a growing sense of fear, a fear that Thomas's attachment to her might be turning into something unhealthy. She wrote of her desire to distance herself, to regain control of her own life and thoughts, something she hadn't felt she had since meeting him. As the police continued to explore Thomas's background, they found a troubling pattern. There had been moments over the years when Thomas's behavior seemed to cross the line from loyalty to obsession. He was always there when Sister Miriam needed something, sometimes even appearing uninvited. He had always been present, but there were times when he had started to act more possessive of her time, her attention, even her space. And lately, as the letters revealed, Sister Miriam had begun to pull away. She had started to spend more time with the other nuns, focusing on her duties and her faith, but Thomas was becoming more withdrawn and anxious. Could his jealousy have turned violent? Investigators began to wonder if Thomas had feared losing Sister Miriam, losing the one person who had been his entire world for so long. It was possible that when he realized she was planning to move away from him emotionally, he snapped. Was it a crime of passion, triggered by the fear of rejection and abandonment? Or was there something more methodical about the way he had carried out the murder? The more they pieced together, the more unsettling it became. Thomas's behavior had become erratic in the days leading up to the crime, and now, with the discovery of the letters, the pieces seemed to fit too well. But still, there were no answers that fully explained the violence of the murder. How could someone who had appeared so gentle, so self-effacing, commit such a brutal act? The town that had once seen him as a humble servant now struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the violent killer he might have become. For the first time, the investigators started to believe that this crime was far more personal than they had imagined. The peaceful facade of the convent had been shattered, and in its place was a dark, tangled web of emotions, secrets, and betrayals. The truth seemed to be hiding just out of reach, and with every new discovery, the darkness deepened. As the investigation intensified, more unsettling details about Sister Miriam's life began to surface. While the focus had initially been on Thomas, it became clear that the story was far more complicated than anyone had realized. The letters between him and Sister Miriam were not the only pieces of evidence that revealed a hidden side to her character. Her past, something she had kept deeply buried, was slowly coming to light. It turned out that Sister Miriam had not always been the devoted, selfless nun that everyone knew her to be. Before she had entered the convent, she had lived a very different life, one filled with secrets and choices that contradicted the image she had carefully constructed. In the months before her death, Sister Miriam had confided in Thomas about her troubled past. She spoke of a life before the convent where she had loved deeply and had been loved in return, but her past was marked by a tragic romance that had left her emotionally scarred. For years, Sister Miriam had lived with the guilt of a love she believed was forbidden. She had fallen in love with a man, a relationship that had been doomed from the start. This romance had been brief, but intense, and the feelings had left an indelible mark on her heart. The details of the relationship were vague, but it was clear that it had ended in pain and regret. Sister Miriam had tried to bury the memory, but as time passed, the weight of it became unbearable. She spoke to Thomas about how she had come to the convent seeking absolution, hoping that her faith could cleanse her of the guilt that she could never escape. Thomas, it seemed, had become the only person she could truly confide in. Their conversations, while seeming innocent on the surface, were filled with a shared understanding of longing and loss. As Sister Miriam opened up to him, Thomas became the keeper of her darkest secrets, the one person who knew everything about her past, the one person who knew her vulnerabilities. But there was something else that had changed in the months before her death. Sister Miriam had begun to plan for a life beyond the convent. She had spoken of leaving, of finding peace in a way that didn't involve the rigid life of religious devotion she had chosen so many years ago. This revelation, shared only with Thomas, was a bitter one. The idea of leaving the convent was both liberating and terrifying for her. She wanted freedom, but that freedom came with a cost. She feared losing her purpose, her sense of self, and perhaps even her faith. Thomas, it appeared, had known of her plans to leave and was devastated. Her desire to move on, to seek a life outside of the convent, had been a blow to him. He had grown deeply attached to her, and the idea of her walking away from him and the life they shared was something he could not accept. Could this be the reason behind the murder? Was Thomas driven to kill Sister Miriam in a desperate attempt to hold on to her, to prevent her from leaving him behind? The more the investigators uncovered about the hidden aspects of Sister Miriam's life, the more it seemed that her death was not just the result of a twisted obsession, but of a deep, emotional conflict that had been festering for years. And, as the details unraveled, the investigators realized that Thomas's feelings for Sister Miriam were far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation continued, a new and unsettling theory began to take shape. The more the police uncovered about Sister Miriam's past, the more it seemed that her relationship with Thomas was not just the tragic result of one man's obsession, but the culmination of years of manipulation, emotional dependency, and unresolved conflict. The deeper the investigators delved into Convent's history, the clearer it became that something darker. In a fit of jealous desperation, he confronted Sister Miriam in the convent garden. It was here, in the place she had once found solace, that their final tragic encounter unfolded. The violence that followed was quick and brutal, too much for someone who had once been so gentle, so devoted. In his mind, he believed that by taking her life, he was somehow preventing her from leaving him, from abandoning the bond they had shared. To Thomas, this was an act of desperate love, an irreversible decision born out of fear and obsession. But the truth of what had transpired that day became all too clear as the investigators carefully reconstructed the events. Thomas had murdered Sister Miriam not out of a momentary lapse in judgment, but as a culmination of years of emotional manipulation and possessiveness. His love for her had transformed into a toxic, suffocating need that left no room for anything but control. He had believed that by killing her, he could preserve the connection they shared forever, no matter the cost. As the town learned of the depths of Thomas's actions, the shock reverberated through every corner of St. Clair's. The peaceful town, once a symbol of unwavering faith and community, was left to grapple with the horrific truth that the darkest secrets had been hiding in plain sight. The murder of Sister Miriam, a woman once seen as a beacon of goodness, had left an indelible mark on the hearts of all who knew her. The town would never be the same, and neither would the story of the convent. The tragedy of Sister Miriam's death was a harsh reminder that even the most sacred of places could hide a darkness too deep to fathom. As the trial of Thomas began, the once tight-knit community of St. Clair's was divided. The town had always prided itself on its faith, its commitment to compassion and kindness, but the revelations of the past few months had shattered the foundation upon which it stood. The death of Sister Miriam, a woman beloved by all, had uncovered a painful truth, one that was difficult to accept. Thomas, the quiet servant who had spent so many years by her side, had committed the unthinkable. And as the trial unfolded, the question that weighed heavily on everyone's mind was whether the justice system could ever truly account for the horror that had unfolded. Throughout the proceedings, the town was haunted by the image of Thomas, the man who had been a fixture in their lives for so long. No one had ever suspected him of harboring such darkness. He had been known for his gentleness, his willingness to help, and his unwavering devotion to Sister Miriam. But now, as he sat in the defendant's chair, a shadow of the man they thought they knew, the townspeople struggled to reconcile the two faces. The quiet, devoted servant and the brutal killer seemed like entirely different people, yet they were one and the same. As the trial continued, Thomas's defense team attempted to argue that he had been driven to madness by years of emotional neglect. They claimed that his deep attachment to Sister Miriam, coupled with her decision to leave, had sent him into a state of psychological collapse. They painted a picture of a man who had been unable to cope with the loss of the only person who had ever shown him kindness. In their eyes, Thomas had not acted out of malice, but out of a deep, suffocating fear of abandonment. But the prosecution was resolute. They argued that Thomas's actions were premeditated. He had planned the murder, carefully watching Sister Miriam in the days before the crime, following her every move. The prosecution painted a chilling portrait of obsession, jealousy, and possessiveness. They spoke of the letters, the journal, and the disturbing evidence that suggested Thomas had killed in a moment of irrational rage. There was no room for compassion in his actions, no remorse in his eyes. Sister Miriam had been his only source of comfort, and when she tried to break free, he had responded with violence. The jury deliberated for what seemed like an eternity, and when the verdict was finally read, there was a collective breath held in the courtroom. Thomas was found guilty of the murder of Sister Miriam. The silence that followed the announcement was deafening. It was as if the entire town had been holding its breath, waiting for some sense of closure, but now that the verdict had been reached, no one knew what to feel. The justice they had sought seemed inadequate in light of the horror that had unfolded. As Thomas was led away in handcuffs, the town was left to pick up the pieces of a broken community. The once peaceful convent, where Sister Miriam had spent so many years of her life, was now a symbol of tragedy and betrayal. The sisters who had once revered her were left to mourn not only her death, but the loss of a world they had believed in. A world that had crumbled beneath the weight of Thomas's actions. The town of St. Clair's would never be the same.